climate solutions. So today is going to be a packed hour and a half of training, kicking off our first ever virtual climate lobby week happening all next week. But before we begin, I want to extend my deepest gratitude and appreciation for all of you who've shown up today and who continue to show up for the climate, show up for democracy and action, and show up for all the people and more than human beings who share this earth and for future generations to come. I'm going to quickly walk you through today's agenda. So first we'll be hearing from Micah Parkin, 350 Colorado Executive Director and Founder, to learn more about what 350 Colorado is doing to help solve the climate crisis. Next, Representative Emily Sirota will be joining us to tell us about the importance of citizen lobbying. We'll then dive deep into the logistics of this virtual climate lobby week and share with you some tips about how to speak with your legislator and to share your personal story. We'll then be opening up to a range of different speakers who will be sharing about our 6 priority bills, followed by a Q&A and any logistics or any bills that you have still questions about. And just so you know, as we go, you're more than welcome to include any questions or comments into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. But that will be the designated time that we'll get to answer those questions out loud. Before wrapping up for the day, we'll move into breakout groups where we'll be separating you into with other members of your legislative district. And then during that time, you'll be able to work out some of the logistics of this upcoming week and also practice some of your lobbying skills. Our session ends today at 11:30, but we're also more than happy to stay on and answer any lingering questions. And if you also have questions that pop up throughout this next week, feel free to reach out to me. We'll put my email into the chat. And for now, I'm going to pass it on to Brent, who will be offering a land acknowledgement. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, everyone, for being here. First, let us acknowledge with deep respect that the lands upon which we gather today are the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, Comanche, Osage, and Kiowa nations and peoples, that we respect the indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future, and thank them for generations of caring for these lands, its fresh flowing air and clear waters, and precious living inhabitants, large and small. We remember the painful history of genocide and forced removal under settler colonialism, and commit ourselves to dismantling structures that perpetuate this legacy and the status quo. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken, may they reaffirm the ties of all indigenous peoples of over 48 historic tribes to these unceded lands we call Colorado. Thank you. And I think I'm passing it back over to Jessica or maybe Micah.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Micah Parkin. I'm Executive Director of 350 Colorado. And I just want to thank all of you so much for attending 350 Colorado's 6th annual lobby day. And I wanted to first just start by thanking Jessica, who's been our primary organizer, and all of the organizing team who helped put today's lobby day and all next week's lobby week together. So if all the organizers, if you all would, just please wave your hands for a minute so everybody can see you. We just really want to show you our appreciation. So thank you. So first, for anyone who's kind of new to 350 Colorado, our mission is to work locally to build the global grassroots movement to solve the climate crisis and to transition to a sustainable future. We're a Colorado-based 501c3 nonprofit organization, but we're part of the global 350.org network. And in case anyone doesn't know, the number 350 represents the safe upper limit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million, according to scientists like renowned NASA scientist James Hansen. Unfortunately, we are way over that now at 350, that 350 parts per million, now at about 415 parts per million, and still headed in the wrong direction, increasing by about 2 to 3 parts per million every year. That's caused the global temperature to already increase by 1 degree Celsius. And with just 1 degree Celsius of warming, the climate crisis is already causing serious impacts here in Colorado, which I know probably many of you have already experienced, and around the world in terms of worsening droughts, wildfires, floods, sea level rise, ocean acidification, vector-borne diseases, more violent storms, and impacts to our economies in terms of disaster damage, decreased food production, tourism, and winter sports impacts, and far more. With a serious and rapid just transition off, without a serious and rapid just transition off fossil fuels, we're headed toward a 3 to 5 degrees Celsius global temperature rise, which would not support life as we know it. And what's most upsetting is that those who've contributed the least to the problem, youth, the poor, and disproportionately communities of color, are worse impacted by the climate crisis and fence line pollution. To have the best chance of keeping global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the International Panel on Climate Change recommends to prevent the worst, we have to transition off fossil fuels rapidly, largely within this decade. I know that's why we're all here today, because we know it's essential that we stand up, make our voices heard, and demand action for a rapid, just transition off fossil fuels and to clean, renewable energy, energy efficiency, regenerative agriculture, and other solutions to address the existential crisis of climate change. Our legislators need to know that this is the top issue for a huge number of their constituents. So thank you all again so much for taking the time to be here today and for organizing meetings next week with your legislators during Climate Lobby Day. We really appreciate you. And now I am pleased to introduce a wonderful member of our state legislature and a climate champion who's going to talk with us about the importance of citizen input into our legislative process. It's Representative Emily Sirota. She represents House District 9 in the Colorado legislature as a social worker and proud progressive Democrat with years of experience working in government and in the Southeast Denver community. Before her election to the Colorado House of Representatives, Emily helped run an early learning center in Denver. She received her BA in political science at Indiana University and received her Master of Social Work from the University of Denver. Emily previously worked for the Colorado Progressive Coalition and helped organize support for paid sick leave. In 2011, she ran for Denver School Board to protect public education. Emily also served as a policy aide to a Democratic U.S. Senator, a Democratic Congressman, and a Democratic Governor. In these roles, she worked on healthcare and budget policy and helped oversee a program to expand healthcare benefits for workers and small businesses. As a representative for House District 9, Emily's championed workers' rights, campaign finance reform, a healthy and vibrant public education system, environmental justice, progressive tax policy, and fundamental reforms to our pillars of democracy. Representative Sirota is the sponsor of the bill we're supporting to divest our state's pension fund, PARA, from fossil fuels. So I'm so honored to welcome Representative Emily Sirota.
Thank you so much, Micah. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm glad to be here with all of you today. And just to share a little bit more about why it's important to make sure that people like you are showing up and contacting their legislators to share what is important to you, what you think your legislator ought to be working on and focusing on and supporting. I know I can speak for me personally. When I have a constituent who contacts me and says, hey, I know you're considering this legislation. Have you talked to this person, or have you considered this? I do it because I want to be responsive to my constituents. It's incredibly meaningful when you hear from the people that you represent about the issues that are important to them, because ultimately we are responsible for representing our districts and for listening to the people that we represent. And I think that especially in these times now of COVID, when most people are staying remote, I'll tell you who's still in the building. It's lobbyists. Lobbyists are still in the building, and on a lot of the issues that I care about and the issues that you care about, we are really it is fighting an uphill battle. When you can take a look on the Secretary of State's website, and you can check out their lobbying registry. Lobbyists have to register on the site on bills, and you can take a look at any piece of legislation that is of interest to you, and you can see how many lobbyists have signed up in one position or another. And I can promise you it will be an eye-opening experience when you see how much we are up against when it comes to climate legislation, but it runs the gamut when we're talking about legislation that may be doing more for the average working person and less for the wealthy and the well-connected. You will see that stark disparity in those lobbying reports, and it has an impact. But you all have something that those lobbyists, they don't have, and that is you have the right to, to come before your legislators and share your perspective as their constituent. And on the whole, you are their voter. They rely on you to get elected. And so, that's a little bit of a different position than those lobbyists, though, money in politics, that's a whole other question. But so it's so important to share your perspective about how this, and right now we're talking about divestment. So how divestment impacts you, and especially those of you who are also para members, and it's your retirement. So not only are we talking about the fate of the planet, which should, be top of everyone's mind, but we are also talking about your retirement security. And so I encourage you very much to share personal stories, as well as all of the compelling facts and arguments that I think you probably will all go over today about why this divestment policy is critical for the state to move forward on. But make it personal and help them understand where you're coming from, as whether it's a parent or a scientist or a retiree, whatever it is. Make that personal, let them get to know you and form that relationship with your legislator, and then follow up. So make sure that after you get an appointment with them and you talk with them and you share the importance of why you want them to support divestment legislation, make sure you follow up. And if they're on the finance committee, say, I look forward to watching the hearing and hearing from you, and keep following up, because whatever happens this year, this is not the end. And it's, as we've seen, even in, New York, which had such a tremendous victory this year, that had been years and years in the making. So I think sometimes when we feel the urgency of what is happening with climate change, it can feel deflating, when we have sometimes losses or setbacks. But I think we're every year that we are moving this, we are moving the conversation forward, and we are causing people to continue to think, and that impacts not just this policy, but policies across the board about how we are addressing climate change. And so I'm very grateful for you all to take your time on a Saturday to figure out how we can move Colorado forward. And I'm just so grateful for all of your activism and support. And I am glad to be on this journey with you.
Thank you so much, Representative Emily Sirotto. We really appreciate everything you're doing. And appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today to inspire everybody up this morning. So thank you. I want to turn it over now to one of our wonderful youth activists who's part of our Youth Action Committee, and that is Phoebe Dominguez. Phoebe, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Phoebe Dominguez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am zooming in from Cheyenne land. I'm going to be giving you a basic overview of why it's different this year. This year is going to be drastically different from all the years because we will not be able to speak with our legislators in person on the floor or via pre-scheduled in-person meetings. Instead, we are going to be teaming up with other constituents from our district and communities to have virtual meetings with our legislators throughout this week, which is March 15th to 19th. In our breakout groups today, we will be discussing our availability for this upcoming week and decide who will be contacting our legislators and who will set up the virtual meetings. Some groups have already begun this process, and we are happy to help in any way. You can email Jessica at 350colorado.org for more information. I'm going to be giving you what's in my toolkit. The toolkit is an awesome reference that you can use. We sent out an email yesterday, and I believe this morning, with this in there. If you do not have access to this or don't have it, please let us know right away so that we can get this to you. It's going to be giving you an intro to 350 Colorado and the climate crisis, which Micah gave us a small introduction. We're going to be giving you an overview and fact sheets of our 6 priority bills, which you will be learning about a little later in the training, and some lobbying logistics and checklists and important links. We are going to be scheduling legislative appointments, so there's going to be a sample phone and email script for that. There's going to be lobbying basics for the legislative appointment, a sample lobbying script, a story of self, us, now resources, and a meeting notes document, as well as Zoom logistic and resources. There's going to be a legislative appointment follow-up email script for emailing them after your meeting, and additional ways to get involved, as well as a social media guide and key terms for understanding the climate crisis. These are just some lobbying basics and tips that you can use when you are meeting with your legislator. Try to be passionate, polite, and courteous and professional. We are trying to build a relationship with your legislator for future discussions and to educate them on issues and offer them follow-up info. You are there as a concerned constituent and not as a lobbyist or on behalf of 350 Colorado or any organization. You want to invite them to be a climate champion and ally, because they are your representative and you want them to be your ally. Ask them to take bold action to address the climate crisis and protect our districts and communities. I'm going to be giving you a sample script. I'm going to be using my own name. Obviously, you will use yours. My name is Phoebe Dominguez and I'm your constituent. I'm going to briefly share on how these issues affect me and others in my district. And I'm going to be sharing the EPAC, which is in your toolkit, and discuss the bill's talking point, which again, you can look in your toolkit for. We're going to make the strong ask. The ask is what you want them to do. And can we count on you to vote in favor of bold climate action to address the climate crisis and protect our communities and districts? And can we count on you to vote yes on all 6 of these climate bills? And make sure to thank your legislator and for their time and allyship. And make sure to ask them if there's anything else you can do to make it easier for them. I'm going to be introducing Giselle. She's going to be giving us a discussion of story, self, us, and now.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Giselle, and I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about how to create a story of self-narrative and how to use it in a public testimony and why that can be so effective in creating and telling your story. So story of self, us, and now derives from the idea of personal stake. So what is personal stake? Well, personal stake is your skin in the game. So it is the personal aspect of why you are involved in the cause that you are involved in. Examples of personal stake include being personally impacted by environmental events like wildfires, hurricanes, floods, etc. Here in Colorado, for example, we had the terrifying wildfires last fall. That could definitely be an example of personal stake. Other examples include having systemic issues violate your values. If you value being connected to the natural world, and there's a fracking well right in your backyard, that is violating your values, and that is personal stake. Another example of personal stake could be a life-altering event that activated you into action. Maybe you never ever thought about climate change before, and then a hurricane destroyed your home, and all of a sudden you think about climate change. That could be another example of personal stake. And we use this personal stake to craft a public narrative. Next slide, please. So a story of self-narrative, we're drawing today from the Marshall Gans framework of story of self, us, and now. So a story of self is the first story that you come to. It is a personal story that shows why you were called to take the action that you're taking. Everyone has a story about an experience that got them involved in a cause, and the story of self is really important for communicating your values and your background and why this is important to you. Because if you can communicate why this is important to you, other people will say, oh, that's important. And then from the story of self, you expand to a story of us. And a story of us is a more broad collective story that illustrates the shared purposes, goals, or vision of a community or organization. Maybe your community is being poisoned by Suncor, for example, or your community is being threatened by local fracking, or maybe your community lives right by the shoreline and you're threatened to be displaced if the sea levels rise. This is a story of us. And then you place that into a story of now, which places the stories of self and us within a time frame to convey a sense of urgency. For example, if we do not dramatically reduce our carbon emissions in the next seven years maximum, our global effects from climate change are going to get dramatically worse. So a story of now gives your story a sense of urgency. And we use these stories and weave them together into a public narrative. So you link these three stories together into a single narrative framework to have maximum impact. Next slide, please. So the story of self is an incredibly powerful tool to use within the climate movement, lots of movements, but particularly in the climate movement, because it helps to convey your values in a way that has emotional impact, and emotional impact is often what drives people to action. If you speak from a place of heart and personal experience, that can show your motivation. That can be extremely inspiring, and personal motivation is contagious. If you're motivated, people listening to you will be motivated just by hearing you. Story of self is often a very, very accessible way to communicate what you're trying to communicate. It's an accessible thing that people can resonate with, and they can resonate with your story and with its values. Stake is also important for solidarity work because it prevents us from acting from a place of trying to save others or from a place of ego. And it helps us clarify why we're fighting for an issue so we can act from that place. One other important part about story of self is people can't argue against or disprove your personal experience. They can't use, facts and logic to just, discount your personal experience, as some people try to do. It really resonates on a deep emotional level. So this is a very powerful tool to use in your toolkit. It's not the only tool. There are lots of ways to have an important idea get across, but story of self is one that's really easy to craft and really, really influential. And I will pass it back to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Giselle. Throughout this year's legislative session, we are deeply urging state legislators to support bold climate legislation that put people and the planet first, not corporate polluters. During this lobby week, let's urge our state senators and representatives to emphatically say yes to a fossil fuel divestment for para, yes to public banking and the end chapter of decades of climate disaster financing, yes to protections from toxic air emissions and the regulation of single-use plastic that harm our only planet and its inhabitants. Yes to energy democracy through community choice energy and demand-side management alternative technologies. Let's be the strong voice pushing for climate justice, environmental justice, and real solutions to the climate crisis. I'll pass it on to Michaela to talk about fossil fuel divestment.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Michaela. I'm part of the Regenerative Ag and Local Food Committee here at 350. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Colorado Para Divestment Bill. So Colorado Para stands for the Public Employees Retirement Association of Colorado. And that's the state's public retirement system that was established in 1931. A para divestment bill was originally introduced in 2020, but it was unable to move forward due to COVID-19. For the current legislative session, the para divestment bill will soon be introduced by Representative Emily Sirota, who we just heard from. So what even is divestment and what are the provisions of the divestment bill in Colorado? Divestment in this context is specifically referring to divesting para pension funds from fossil fuels. Not only is the motivation for this legislation climate related, but it's also fiduciary. In other words, because the world is moving away from fossil fuels, keeping pension funds invested in fossil fuels will likely be contrary to fund success. The state of Colorado is not the first place to consider this idea. New York State recently divested its pension fund, Denver and Boulder are both divested, and Aspen also recently announced plans to divest. The Colorado Para Divestment Bill, should it pass, will implement some very specific requirement for the Public Employees Retirement Association Board. These include, the board will have to create a list where all para fund fossil fuel investments are detailed. After the bill goes into effect, peril fossil fuel funds, including all stocks, equities, assets, securities, and other obligations, must be divested within 1 year. And any new direct investments into fossil fuels will be prohibited. Why is this important? First, divesting is consistent with Colorado's greenhouse gas reduction goals, which were outlined in HB 1261, and eliminating our dependence on fossil fuels will be key for reaching global climate goals too. There is both a practical and a moral imperative to succeed in these objectives. But as mentioned, it's not just about climate. By failing to move away from fossil fuels, there's a higher risk of investment loss. In fact, one study found that had Para divested in 2009, it would be valued at $1.77 billion more than it is today. Finally, if you want to learn a little bit more, please check out our fact sheets or visit fossilfreeColoradoPara.org. Now we'll hear from Giselle again, who will tell us a little bit more about the importance of public banking. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. So an important aspect of public banking is that it helps to keep our money circulating within the community. Similar to what Michaela just said about para divestment, our public funds are currently put into private Wall Street banks like JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo. And these banks are the drivers of climate change. The profits that are generated from our state's public deposits do not currently go towards local community development or sustainability. The profits go to finance things that dramatically contribute to climate crisis. These are things like transnational pipelines, for example, Enbridge's Line 3, or offshore drilling projects, or the expansion of fracking. So that is currently what our public funds are being used to finance. They are not being used to finance our local needs and local sustainability projects. A public bank would keep our public funds circulating within the local community by creating a financial institution that holds and manages our public funds and is owned by the people of the state through their representative governments. So although it is owned by the government, a public bank would be managed by independent financial and banking professionals, and it would be protected from political and corporate influence in its decision making. And the best part of a public bank is that the profits that are generated from the bank would circulate back into the state economy instead of filling the offshore accounts of wealthy shareholders or financing interstate pipelines. Currently, we are experiencing a dramatic economic shortfall due to the COVID-19 crisis. A lot of local businesses were not able to access the loans that they needed to stay open from the Paycheck Protection Program, and this was especially the case with businesses owned by people of color. And so the public bank, if established in the state, could help to keep our state funds local and make sure that those funds are available for our local communities that need them the most. Our bill status, we are currently in the process of speaking with legislators on this issue to get it on their radars. A lot of work this year has been to counter the dominant narrative that is being pushed by the private bank lobbies who do not want this to move forward. They do not want our state pulling our money out of their big banks. So we've been very, very successful this year in getting the word out about this issue, getting this on people's radars. This is not an issue that a lot of people have heard of before. Currently, we are still looking for a bill carrier, but even if we do not get a bill title this year, it is crucial that we continue to get it on legislators' radars, that we continue to amplify this as a solution to finance so many of the incredible projects that our legislators are trying to push forward. Make sure that we don't have cuts to our social programs, our healthcare, our education. These cuts disproportionately impact low-income communities and BIPOC communities. So we need to make sure that the finances are available for our communities that need them. Thank you so much. And I will pass it now to Joyce.
Good morning. Thank you, Gisela. I am a 350 volunteer and a retired community health educator. It is difficult for me and for so many others to wrap our brains around the massive problems caused by the climate crisis and our need for immediate action. I strongly believe that more people can understand the urgency of this problem by looking at the negative impacts of pollution on our mounting health problems. That being said, please be aware that refineries, factories, coal plants, and other industrial activities release health-harming toxic chemicals into the air. These chemicals include, but are not limited to, benzene, hydrogen cyanide, and hydrogen sulfide. They are associated with increases in health complications for community members, exacerbate existing health conditions, and even cause death. These hazardous chemicals can cause cancer, respiratory arrest, severe burns and pain, seizures, pulmonary edema, asthma complications, and chronic lung disease. Our communities and neighbors are suffering now. Many families are suffering from disproportionate reports of the diseases just mentioned, in addition to very rare forms of blindness, cerebral palsy, autism, and other severe maladies. A most important item in HB 211189 is the new requirement that these companies must not only monitor their emissions, but they must directly report findings to the community in 2 languages and in real time. For the first time, the very first time, transparency is mandated and residents will be informed. This information can be the basis for immediate community action. So please refer to your fact sheet and the slides as I review some of the details of this bill. This legislation would strengthen existing laws by achieving the following. The AQC, the Air Quality Control Commission, is to consider adding new types of covered air toxics to the existing list and adjust emission thresholds. This is important because we are always learning more about the negative health environmental risks of even trace amounts of these chemicals. The bill will only cover 4 facilities: Suncor, Phillips 66 Terminal, Sinclair Terminal, and Goodrich. The covered facility must outreach to communities disproportionately impacted in the 2 most prevalent languages spoken in the communities. Covered facilities must conduct fence line monitoring of covered air toxics. They must pay for the monitoring and must publicly report the results of the monitoring in real time. Facilities are required to take corrective action within 15 days after the violation occurs. The bill also requires the Department of Public Health and Environment to conduct community-based monitoring of covered air toxics in areas near the covered facilities and to publicly report the results. Though not perfect and not quick enough perhaps, this bill demands respect for the public's need to know so that we can take action, and action is really imperative. The bill is assigned to the House Energy and Environmental and Finance Committee, and I've just learned that it will be presented on March 25th. So we will be urging you to write testimony in support of the bill as an individual or as a representative of any organization that you might be representing. And so now I guess I'll pass it on to Madhvi.
Madhvi couldn't be here today after all, unfortunately. So
I'm
Phoebe
so
Dominguez
sorry.
is gonna, no worries. So Phoebe's gonna present for us. Thanks, Phoebe.
Hi. Yes. So I'm going to be teaching you all about the plastic regulation local ban repel bill. What does this legislation solve? It uses single-use disposable plastic contribute to climate change and are a major source of pollution, threatening our health and our environment. Plastics are made from fossil fuels, and the production of disposable plastic disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of color. Currently, Colorado communities and districts are preempted from acting their own bans on plastic packaging. While the federal government is slow to act, excuse me, Colorado can follow other states and take action now. What would this legislation do? It would reduce the use of toxic plastics by prohibiting the use of expanded polystyrene products, which is plastic cups, plates, and containers. It prohibits retailers from providing single-use plastics, carry-out bags, and requires stores to charge 10 cents for each paper bag. It empowers local communities to take control of their plastic pollution by repealing ban on local government regulations of plastic. The bill's status, it was introduced by Representative Vandales, Representative Cutter, and Senator Gonzalez.
And let's pass it to Brent to go over Community Choice Energy Study Bill.
Great, thank you. So yeah, as we just mentioned, hello everyone again. I'll be discussing the Community Choice Energy Study Bill. And in that similar format as we've been going, I'll start with what kind of problems does this legislation solve? And in that process, just have to detail a bit about what is community choice energy. So community choice energy, also known as community choice aggregation or CCA, if enacted in Colorado, would break the monopoly of investor-owned utilities in Colorado, those being like Xcel Energy and Black Hills Energy. And it would do that by allowing municipalities and local governments to procure energy through a competitive wholesale market. And so just buying the energy from someone other than the utility. In this process, communities could save money through having greater choice and competition. They can choose more renewable energy sources of electricity. And in that process, they can accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels in line with the community's wishes and goals for that transition. And it can do all of this without disrupting how electricity gets transmitted from the place it's generated through the grid to consumers and ratepayers' households. So it doesn't affect any of the grid and the transmission side, and you would still have the typical billing relationship with the utility that services your area. Go ahead, next slide, please. So what does this legislation do? First, it's in the title, but we want to reemphasize that it's a community choice energy study bill. So that means if enacted, it will not bring community choice energy to Colorado. Instead, it will initiate studies to see if community choice energy would be a good fit for Colorado. In fact, there would be two studies. The first is a feasibility study conducted by an independent energy expert under the guidance of the Public Utilities Commission. And the second study would be an investigatory proceeding at the Public Utility Commission itself, where stakeholders and various experts will provide public testimony, identify best practices, and then recommend legislative changes to the government to help potentially facilitate CCE for Colorado. Currently, the status of the bill is that it has not been introduced in 2021 yet. It was introduced in 2020 by Representative Aide Hooten, and we expect the bill to be reintroduced. And last year, it actually failed to pass out of the Appropriations Committee. So that'll be where we focus a bit of our additional attention in lobbying efforts this year. And in the meantime, Colorado utilities, again, like these investor-owned utilities, Xcel and Black Hills Energy, they continue to operate as monopolies under a cost of service revenue model, which guarantees profits and a set rate of return on any investment that they choose to make, regardless of its value to ratepayers. And that process incentivizes capital-intensive solutions that lack cost-saving innovation and that lack consumer choice. While if we did get CCE established in Colorado, it would create more local, not-for-profit public agencies that enhance energy democracy and would have improved accessibility and accountability to the communities. And also, again, it could speed the adoption to renewable energy and reduce costs in the process, because we keep seeing these stories come out about how the fossil fuel electricity infrastructure in the state is less reliable, more expensive than even the utilities say it will be. And then the electricity prices spike when there are cold weather situations or outages in different places. And all of that is just adding additional costs to the consumer that we could potentially short circuit if we have community choice energy. And now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Ron, who will discuss demand side gas management.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. My name is Ron Bennett. My pronouns are he, his, him. I'm an architect and a volunteer at 350 Colorado. My motivation stems from the fact that for 20 years, I've been told as an architect that natural gas is a clean bridge fuel. And I've used it a lot in buildings because it was supposed to be the best option. Since getting involved with 350, I've learned the problems with frack gas and leaky infrastructure and the damage that fugitive methane does to our environment. So today, I'd like to tell you about a proposed House bill concerning the modernization of gas energy efficiency program sponsored by Senator Hansen and Representatives Burnett and Kennedy. Demand-side management programs are rebates and incentives offered by public utilities to businesses and consumers to reduce energy demand. Gas DSM programs aim to reduce or replace the need for gas in buildings, incentivizing efficiency measures, non-gas equipment like heat pumps, renewable energy sources, including behind-the-meter thermal solar. I just dropped a link into the chat for a new webinar with our friend Laurent from Colorado Solar and Storage Association. He's been working on this bill for a very long time. He explains behind-the-meter thermal solar, a technology in which he's an expert, and the benefits of this bill, of course. I can offer an example of DSM incentives in action. I have two projects, one apartment building in permitting and another that's still on the boards. Well, the development team has already designed both to be all electric, eliminating all those pesky gas lines and flues. My newly enlightened developer client and I have evaluated the cost and benefits of current incentives. Energy Star appliances and LED lights can earn up to $800 per apartment in utility rebates, while state-of-the-art passive house certification is worth about $3,500 per apartment. We've looked at improvements to the building envelope with advanced air sealing, additional insulation, and high-performance windows and doors. We've added energy recovery ventilation and upgraded the heat pumps. Not to mention, we've got 38 electric vehicle chargers in the garage. With some building codes still catching up, it's rebates and incentives in addition to tax credits that are driving the construction industry toward net zero. In Colorado and many states, the legislators set the rules for these programs. Energy efficiency incentives proposed by investor-owned utilities are evaluated by the Public Utilities Commission. These incentives are designed to benefit ratepayers while meeting the state's energy saving goals. The savings are measured in financial terms of current cost and future value. The bill revises the current metrics to consider the social cost of carbon and methane, placing a value on climate change. If passed, it'll be the first ever piece of legislation in Colorado that counts methane's climate effects in utility planning, and that's a big deal. Current incentives discount the future benefits of efficiency investments at about a 7% discount rate for the utility's cost of capital. That's how much it costs them to borrow money from hedge fund billionaires, I guess. Instead, the bill proposes to discount them at the rate of inflation, which is about 1.5%, more relevant to ratepayers who both fund and benefit from DSM programs. This change will more than double the value given to offsetting gas and DSM planning. The bill also requires investment in programs for qualified customers to improve equity for all income levels. For example, utilities could pay the full cost of weatherizing homes occupied by income-challenged families. If this legislation passes, utility customers could realize net economic benefits of over $500 million through 2030, while reducing CO2 emissions by tens of millions of tons at the same time. Next slide, please. So why else do we like this bill? Well, buildings with gas heating are incompatible with a carbon-free future that's powered by renewable energy. This bill goes after that 15% slice of the state's greenhouse gas emissions pie. Some of you may have seen those colorful pie charts that show emissions from buildings rivaling those from the transportation sector. Problem is, buildings last a lot longer than cars and trucks, so we need to act fast and stop creating a legacy of gas-fired equipment in our homes and businesses. Just adding to the many buildings that will need to be decarbonized eventually. As someone who builds, I can tell you that incentives work, and we need more investment in zero carbon buildings, on-site renewables, and demand response technology. And that's what this bill does. So back to metrics. Methane's global warming potential, or GWP, compares the climate effects of 1 ton of fugitive methane to the equivalent number of tons of CO2. Carbon dioxide persists in the atmosphere for centuries, but methane is a short-lived climate pollutant that only lasts for about 12 years. Because the pollutants' lifespans are vastly different, scientists and policymakers need to decide on what timescale to use to reconcile this difference. The de facto standard of GWP 100 spreads methane's damage out over a century, so it's assumed to be 28 times worse than CO2. When you limit that time horizon to a more realistic 20 years, including climate feedbacks, GWP 20 jumps to 86. That means for every ton of fugitive methane that leaks out of a frack gas infrastructure, it's as bad as 86 tons of carbon dioxide. So from what I understand, the bill was written using GWP 20, the more stringent standard. But word is the Colorado Energy Office requested the metric be changed to GWP 100, making methane 3 times less bad than the original metric. It's our hope that in our lobbying efforts, 350 can build support for an amendment to use the more appropriate GWP 20. 20 years is a more reasonable time frame to evaluate a gas that lasts for 12, building equipment that lasts 20 to 30 years, and in the context of a greenhouse gas roadmap with milestones as to help consumers use less natural gas, we need to change the outdated ways we calculate costs and savings. This bill will help consumers save money while helping reduce greenhouse gases that cause climate change. If you'd like more information, please follow the link on page 3 of the toolkit. Thanks for listening. And now back to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you so much to all of the speakers who have presented so far. Such thorough information, and I really hope it's been useful to all of you who are sitting in here preparing to speak with your legislators. To prepare for our lobby week, we've already grouped everyone based off of their legislative district. And we put that into a really easy to access Google Sheet, which we'll be sharing in the chat. The sheet's color coded and includes everyone's availability and contact information, so it'll be easy to connect with your group. But we will also be breaking out into breakout groups based off of that sheet today. So during those breakout groups, just be sure to confirm with that sheet to make sure that all that contact information and your availability is up to date. And then also during the breakout groups, you're going to be going over some additional logistics. For the full checklist, please be sure to refer to page 6 of your toolkit. And if the toolkit hasn't already been posted in the chat, let's post that again to the chat. But some of those things that you'll be deciding during your breakout groups will be deciding, for instance, which person will be covering which bill during the meeting or which bills. We want ideally for all 6 of these bills to be covered. So self-identify which one you're most comfortable with, passionate about, and things like that. Also during the breakout group, be sure to decide who's going to be leading the meeting, such as giving the introductions to the legislator and keeping everyone to time throughout the meeting. Decide who will be kind of like the lead scheduler. So that would be scheduling the appointment with the legislator, confirming, a day or two before your scheduled appointment, creating a calendar and a Zoom link and sending that out to your group and to the legislator, filling out a meeting form that says, okay, I've scheduled an appointment, and that lets us know that there's an appointment scheduled and helps others to find that meeting for you, to join it with you. And also share out some fact sheets to your legislator prior to the meeting. Now, during the meeting, you're going to also want to identify somebody who will be taking notes of that process and sharing the notes with myself and with others in your group after the meeting is finished, who will be sending all of the fact sheets via the chat feature during the Zoom meeting with your legislator, and then afterwards sending a follow-up thank you email to your legislator with any additional requested information. And again, those fact sheets, we really want to make sure that they have that. They're super beautiful, and everyone on this team has put a lot of work into putting together all that information there. So again, please review page 6 of your toolkit. It has a super thorough checklist. You won't miss anything. All right, and then some final frequently asked questions before we break out into the Q&A section. If you only reach the legislative aide, that's perfectly okay. That's going to actually happen more often than not. If you only reach their answering machine, however, please be sure to, and if you reach the legislative aide, make an appointment through the aide to meet with your legislator, and everything will be a-okay. But if you only reach their answering machine, please be sure to leave a voicemail, including saying that you're a constituent. That way it flags it that they're going to reach out to you sooner. Try calling again, and then also you could leave, send an email to your legislator or to their aide. There are sample phone and email scripts in the toolkit. If the legislator is not available to meet during this upcoming week, you can either schedule a meeting with the legislative aide that is designated to work on environmental and climate issues, or you could instead schedule a meeting for the following week. So just discuss during the breakout groups today which option your group feels most comfortable with, or if they're open to either or. After you schedule your meeting, please be sure to fill out that meeting form. It's so helpful to us and so helpful to help build community so others can join into your meeting. And if you can't meet your group's meeting, this is a little bit of a challenge. So if you can't make your group's meeting, that is totally okay. There are several groups, and you'll see that on that color-coded form, that, for instance, will only have that one person from a district signed up for a legislator. So you could instead go and join into one of those. That'll really be supportive for that other person who otherwise might not feel comfortable going in just by themselves to meet with their legislator. And in fact, we actually need 8 or so volunteers who would be excited to pair up with other members from across the state and attend some meetings with them outside of their own legislative district. This is particularly a really good option for folks in like Boulder County, with Senator Steve Fenberg, who have 15 or so folks that are registered from that county, or even like the Western Denver group has maybe 10 or so folks registered. So let's spread out the love and go help some other folks across the state. An additional option for folks in those larger groups is that we have a few legislators that we really want to make sure that we're chatting with, but we don't yet have anyone from their district signed up. So if you're interested in kind of forming a subgroup that reaches out to all those unmatched key legislators, please email me, or you can also, or put your name and that sort of I volunteer to be that type of person into the chat, and we'll try our best to kind of shift you around during your breakout groups. No promises, but we'll do our best with technology. And I hope that covers everything. There's also more Q&As and tons more information in our toolkit, and I'll open it up now to any Q&As. I can't see the chat feature, but you're more than welcome now to unmute yourself if you have a question. And if maybe Giselle or somebody on the team wants to just relay any information that they see into the chat, we'll do our best to answer it.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
Right at the beginning, I think it was Mika who mentioned that 350 is a safe limit, and our limit now, our actual number is 415 or 450.
415, yeah, about,
415.
yeah.
Well, here we are living in this supposedly very healthy state.
Yeah, yeah, that's the global, basically parts per million of carbon in our atmosphere, and we surpassed it, I think, in the 90s. So unfortunately, we're past several of our planetary boundaries, and it's really important that we continue to do this sort of activism work to really push for, you know, top down and bottom up solutions.
Do we have comps of other states in the country?
So the 415 is just the global parts per million. So it's not
global. Okay,
yeah.
not Colorado.
Correct, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to clarify something with the breakout rooms. So I pre-assigned everyone to a breakout room prior to the meeting starting, but for some reason, a lot of people, like, it didn't translate over, like maybe you're using a different email address or a different name. So a lot of people have been assigned, but a lot of people have not been assigned. So I just turned on the option to choose your breakout room. So there will be a list of all the breakout rooms that are available, and they're labeled by who the main senator is. So if you could choose who your senator is, it will take you to that breakout room. And I think that'll be the easiest, fastest way to assign everyone. But please let me know if you have any issues.
Very quickly, Jessica, I just wanted to mention there's a question in the chat that, because I know you mentioned a second ago, you're not seeing the chat, just if there's a list of what we should accomplish in the breakout room. And I think you're planning to put those questions back up, right? The discussion points for the breakout room in a moment.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be posting those questions back up. You won't see it once you're actually moved into the breakout rooms. So if somebody would be able to post the chat into the chat again, the link to the toolkit, it'll be page 6. And there's a super easy to follow checklist. Thanks for the question. And I think Anne was trying to ask a question or make a comment also.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to type it into the chat. So are we looking only at the senators or also at the reps?
Great question. Both senators and representatives. There might be some overlap and inconsistency within your group, so you'll be matched up by folks who share the same senator, but there might be a few other representatives that maybe isn't your representative. And what I really recommend is that you're a group, so let's try to support one another, and it's okay if you attend a meeting with another representative that isn't your own, and somebody will return the favor for you. Any other questions? Well, then I guess we can go into the breakout groups. Is that all prepared, Giselle?
Yes, I'm gonna, it might be a little clunky, but I'm gonna open the rooms now. And there's still several people who haven't been assigned, so we'll get you where you need to go. But I just opened the rooms now.
Perfect. So yeah, once again, refer to your toolkit, page 6, and also you can check out the fact sheets as well. That's posted into the toolkit, but it might also be in the chat somewhere as well.
And we'll be in these rooms for about 20 minutes. Is that right, Jessica?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Thanks. Oh, shoot. I hope folks haven't already started joining. I was going to also share that during these breakout groups is also a time to practice some of your storytelling and lobbying skills. We'll be hopping in and out of the groups, and you can also use the ask for help button if you specifically need us to hop in for you. But yeah, so after you do all of the logistics planning, also take time to practice speaking about the bills or do your introductions with your lobbyists.
In the chat, we have a question from Jesse Rosero. I don't see Janet Buckner.
Oh, sorry. Jess, it's possible that, and I'm so glad that you're able to make it today. It's possible that they might not have been able to make it today. So if you're the only person in the group, let's figure out.
Yeah, you could put me wherever.
Yeah, there's a couple groups that only have one person. So you could go to the Winter and Mollica breakout room. You could go to the Weissman and Fields breakout room.
Giselle,
Yes.
I'm having trouble finding one, but I'm happy to help anyone. So you can pair me with any one person.
Okay. Here, I'm gonna.
We recorded this and we'll be posting it on YouTube and our Facebook, and we'll also send out an email. So in addition to looking through the toolkit and the fact sheets and all that, they can also watch this training. Yeah.
How do we connect with the representative? I mean, there are people assigned to connect with them, but are we connecting by phone or Zoom, or how does that work?
So to schedule the appointment, first call and then email as well. But for the actual meeting, most of them will be using Zoom. There might be a few offices that prefer some other sort of virtual technology, but yes, it's all virtual. It'll most likely be Zoom. So if you could have someone who's comfortable on your team setting up a Zoom meeting, that would be great.
Will the Zoom be theirs, or do we have to have our own Zoom?
So somebody in your group will likely set up the meeting. It's possible a certain legislator or aide might set up the meeting, but most likely that'll be something that someone within your group will volunteer for.
And if your group needs help setting up a Zoom, I think there is a little walkthrough, but also you can just contact any of us and we can help you do that pretty quick.
Yeah. Any final questions?
One question. In our group, it was brought up that there are multiple additional climate change related bills, and that they're in various stages, including the ones that we've talked about today. Is just to understand the larger lay of the land, are we just, because we got to manage ourselves, we're tackling these 6 and others, or addressing others, or how does that work? And when we have conversations with representatives and senators, is there a broader conversation that might be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And this will be the last question for this, and then we'll leave space after we close out, just so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we'll leave space afterwards for any more questions. But as for your question, Bob, there is information in the toolkit on climate change impacts, sort of what Micah covered at the beginning of the session. So you're also able to have one person designated to speak about the climate crisis as a larger issue. But yes, we do want the focus to be on these 6 priority bills. We're really pushing hard this legislative session to put all of our energy into those bills. We are also, of course, supporting other bills and opposing other bills, but these are our priority bills that we have coalitions that have been working on for quite a while to pass these bills. And another thing is that what I do like about this format, rather than the traditional lobby day format, is that this is a really great way to connect you guys into a group. And throughout this entire legislative session, you could continue to make appointments with your legislators to address other bills or other topics. It's like citizen lobbying and activism isn't just like a one-day thing. Of course, this is like a 1-week extra power focus, but let's continue this momentum throughout this whole session. Does that answer your question? Oh. All right, and I'll pass it on to Phoebe, and then we'll finish out with some more questions at the end.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. It means so much. And hopefully you are, like me, excited to lobby. Sorry. Please join us next week on Friday from 6 to 7 p.m., which is the 19th, for a Lobby Week happy hour debrief. We will be sharing our experiences. And please, if you have any questions, email us at jessica@350colorado.org. I believe that I believe it's in the chat. But if you need any extra help, please email us, and we are here to help. Please, we will be staying on for any additional questions, so please feel free to listen and stay on. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming, and it means a lot.
So I have some interest in some other issues as well. Is this supposed to be like strictly limited to these 6 bills? I'm wondering how people might feel about other issues, water law, for example, and ecology.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and thanks, Scott. And thanks everybody. Anybody who has questions, y'all please do stick on. And I'll just say, Scott, yeah, if you hear of other bills, we know, like for example, there's an ag workers bill, and there are several other bills of concern, both good and bad. And so what we're thinking about is maybe making a website with some of the other bills to point people to that are of concern, either good or bad, and beyond these 6. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And as any of you are hearing or seeing it, the more of us that are watching and paying attention to this, the better. And so if y'all are seeing bills that we need to pay attention to and spread the word to support or oppose, please let us know. You can email Jessica at 350colorado.org, who's a co-chair of our legislative committee, or myself, or any of the organizers, and we want to be trying to get information about those bills. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah, this isn't a bill. It's more of an issue that's part of a larger scale movement, especially across the Intermountain West. I'm just trying to get it on their radars a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to add, because a similar kind of question came up in my breakout group, and it is basically like for a follow-up email and following up in general, is like, can only one person do it, or can lots of people do it? And I think something we just wanted to emphasize is we would love if everyone like communicates with their legislators a lot more on various issues that they support and find important. That's the whole thing that Micah was mentioning about really plugging in and watching this process as it unfolds, because there's a lot of unknowns at this early stage that things are going to start to percolate through the system. Some things will pass and we can put those wins aside, and some things will start to struggle and might need a little extra push. And there's always the possibility of new things and things coming up in the future that we want to start bringing up to our legislators. And so whatever you are advocating on behalf of with your legislator, build that relationship, and all that is productive in the long run.
And then I also see another good question in the chat. Someone asked, how long a meeting should we ask for? We are in the heat of the legislative session, so it'll vary based off of the legislator's availability. I think 30 minutes could be a good amount of time. An hour would be unbelievable if you're lucky enough to be able to have that much time with your legislator, but also be prepared that it's possible that the legislator is so busy that they only have time for a 15-minute chat. So just be prepared to give like the quickest elevator pitch for all of your bills.
Do you have elevator pitches in the toolkit? I haven't had a chance to completely look over it.
We have kind of like a 1-sentence thing for all of them on page. I think it's 3 maybe of the toolkit, one of the first few pages. But I would probably, the most helpful would be to look into the fact sheets for them. There's typically kind of like, it's not quite written out as an elevator pitch, but it is like pretty clearly laid out there.
So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Just a logistical question. When we get that meeting, are we supposed to discuss all 6 of the bills?
Yes, ideally. Yeah.
Okay.
And it looks like Heidi, yeah. Just for my group, we want more clarification on the invite people part of it. Would we be inviting like our family and friends, even if they're not in the district, just to sort of be there as a larger Zoom audience? Or what was the
you're able to invite some other folks, even if they're not from your district. I know I've personally gone and like lobbied other, like citizen lobbied other legislators that aren't my own. And I think that's like a good way to kind of practice. And also be sure to make sure that encourage them to maybe find the group that is within their district, but it's also perfectly okay for them to come and join and be an extra voice in the effort.
So it would be inviting people to actually be participating in the lobbying and being a voice.
Yeah, ideally. Another option is for them to like, you're also able to have someone just sit in and observe and kind of like process those skills that way. And then you can also maybe assign like, okay, will you be the note taker for this group? So there might be a few other tasks that you can ask them to support with.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions? Well, if that is the end, thank you all so much for coming on and staying for this extra time. I really am so inspired by everyone's passion and care for the environment and care for our communities. Let's keep in touch throughout this whole week and beyond. Always feel free to message me. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Jessica. Thank you.